Before the story begins, in the unforgiving lands of the New Mexico frontier, silence can speak louder than bullets, and one act of mercy can ignite a firestorm of consequence. When a lone farmer defies warnings to save a dying man, the ghosts of the past ride in before the dust can settle. What follows is not just a standoff, it's a reckoning. The wind that swept across the barren stretch of the Crowley land carried more than just dust that evening. It carried fate. Elias Crowley stood at the edge of his property, boots planted firm in the cracked earth, hat shading his brow, when he saw the figure crawling, half buried in sand and dusk, and it might have been a dying coyote, but it wasn't. It was a man. Elias rushed forward, not from impulse, but something deeper, maybe guilt, maybe memory. The man's skin was burned, lips split and dry, his breath shallow, his chest moved like a broken bellows. Around his neck hung a braided cord, holding a carved symbol Elias couldn't place, but instinctively recognized as tribal, ancient and sacred. By the time Elias bent down, he already knew two things. This man had run far, and he had nowhere left to run. Back at the house, Sarah stood on the porch, arms crossed tightly, apron dusted with flour and worry. She didn't speak, not right away, even as Elias carried the stranger inside. Jeremiah was quicker with words. "You lost your damn mind?" the brother-in-law hissed from the barn shadows. He could be one of them. Elias said nothing. He didn't have the luxury of explanation. Not yet. Inside, they laid the man by the hearth. Abigail, only 16 and still caught between the softness of girlhood and the fire of womanhood, watched silently. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, didn't hold fear, only curiosity. She knelt beside the man, offering a cloth soaked in cool well water. "He's not gonna make it," Sarah said quietly, behind Elias. "You bring that in here, you better be ready for what comes with it." "I am," Elias replied, though the knot in his gut said otherwise. That night, no one slept, not properly. The house breathed shallow. The man coughed once, a sound like gravel. Elias sat watch with a rifle propped nearby, but his eyes stayed on the man's face. There was something familiar in it, though blurred by time and pain. Outside, the desert whispered warnings. At dawn, a shadow moved beyond the window, then another, then another. Sarah was the first to see them. She dropped the tin basin in her hands. The clang pierced the morning calm. "Elias," she said, voice low, trembling. He walked to the door slowly. Every step felt like a decision. When he stepped outside, the rising sun revealed them. Riders, maybe 200 strong, silent, still, mounted on dust-streaked horses, their silhouettes jagged against the horizon like ghosts carved from rock. Spears and rifles were held low, not yet raised, but their presence was a threat louder than any war cry. Elias froze. Behind him, the door creaked as Sarah peered out. Jeremiah muttered a curse under his breath. Abigail stepped beside her father. "They're here for him," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Elias." "Or for me." No sound came from the riders. No signal, no banner, only a stillness more terrifying than any charge. Elias took one step back, then another. Inside, now. The door closed behind them like a coffin lid. Inside, silence fell, but it was heavy. Elias paced. Sarah clutched her children. Jeremiah gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Abigail returned to the injured man, whose chest now rose more steadily, still unconscious, still unaware of the storm he had brought. The family was trapped, not just by the riders, but by the truth none of them had voiced yet. Something deeper than fear lingered in Elias's eyes. Sarah saw it. Abigail felt it. Jeremiah didn't wait long. "I warned you," he spat. "We're dead now." "We're not," Elias said flatly. "Then why are they out there? Just watching? Waiting?" Elias looked out the window. The riders hadn't moved. Their silence was more unnerving than any threat. It was as if they were mourning something, or someone. Abigail turned to her father. "Who is he?" Elias hesitated, then lied. "I don't know," but his hands trembled. And outside, 200 pairs of eyes watched a house full of secrets. The air inside thickened with dread, and outside the desert held its breath. A knock never came, just the sound of wind brushing over dry ground, and the knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. And then from the back of the house came a cough, rough, human, alive. The man was waking up, and with his voice came the unraveling. Tacoma's breath was shallow, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that pressed into a room without asking permission. His eyes opened slowly, lids like stone doors. They were dark, alert, and filled with something ancient. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the ceiling of the Crowley house, as though trying to remember what sky looked like. Elias knelt beside him. "You're safe," he said gently. Tacoma turned his head. His gaze met Elias's and lingered. There was no fear in it, only recognition. "I remember you," he rasped. Elias's heart dropped. From the corner, Sarah stiffened. Abigail, sitting by the hearth, looked between them, her instincts already sharpening. Jeremiah didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. "You two know each other?" he asked, suspicious. Elias didn't answer. Not yet. He helped Tacoma sip from a tin cup, then eased him back onto the blanket. The silence said enough. To Sarah, to Jeremiah, to Abigail. The stranger wasn't a stranger. Not entirely. Outside, the stillness held. The riders hadn't moved. Not a twitch. "Why aren't they attacking?" Sarah whispered. Her voice carried a tremor now. Less fear, more confusion. Elias moved to the window. "They're waiting for something." "What?" "For him," Elias said. That was the first time he used a name. Tacoma. The sound of it made the room colder. "You lied," Sarah said, quietly but sharp as glass. "You knew who he was." "I didn't lie," Elias replied. "I wasn't sure. Not until he looked at me." Abigail stepped closer to Tacoma. "Why are they here?" Tacoma took a long breath before answering. "Because they think I'm dead." Those words shifted everything. Elias sat down, heavy. "We need to talk." But before he could begin, hooves thundered in the distance. Not from the warriors, but from the road. Riders. 3 of them, raising dust behind them. Townmen, armed. Jeremiah went to the door and opened it slightly. "It's McGraw and the sheriff's boys," Elias cursed under his breath. "Stay inside." The 3 men dismounted fast, rifles slung, boots scraping dust. "Crowley," one of them shouted. "We saw him from the ridge. You need to hand that savage over, or this whole place goes up." Sarah's breath caught. Abigail stood frozen. Elias stepped out, hands raised. "He's not a threat." Sheriff Nathan Barrow stepped forward, mustache twitching with disdain. "The hell he ain't. He's a killer, escaped from the Redstone massacre. My office has got a warrant and a reward." "He's not what you think," Elias said, trying to keep calm. "Let me talk to the tribe. There doesn't need to be blood." "You should have thought about that before dragging this mess into town," Barrow snapped. "This ain't your call anymore." Jeremiah stepped outside beside Elias. "Sheriff's right, you're putting us all at risk." Barrow glanced at Jeremiah, then back to Elias. "You got till sundown. Either he walks out, or we come in." Elias said nothing. He turned his back on them and walked inside. As the door shut, Sarah confronted him. "What did you do, Elias?" He looked at her, eyes filled with years he never shared. "I made a mistake. Years ago. I thought I buried it. But some things don't stay buried." He sat down, finally ready. "It was during the land wars. Tacoma's people had a camp down by the river. Tensions were high. No one trusted anyone. One night I was part of a scouting party. We were told there were raiders planning an ambush. We struck first." He looked up at Tacoma. "Your brother was there. I didn't know who he was. I saw movement. I fired. I didn't ask questions." Tacoma's face was unreadable. "He wasn't a warrior. He was just gathering firewood." Elias nodded. "I know that now." Sarah turned away. "And you never told us." "I wanted to. But how do you explain to your children that the land under their feet was bought with blood?" Abigail stared at her father, tears welling. Not from fear, not from, but something deeper. Disillusionment. "I thought you were a good man." "I try to be," Elias said. "But this place, it makes you choose things. Sometimes the wrong things." Outside, the warriors still hadn't moved. Inside, the family had already begun to crack. Tacoma broke the silence. "They won't wait forever." "What do they want?" Sarah asked. "Justice," he replied, "and maybe me." "But why haven't they attacked?" Abigail asked. Tacoma turned to her, softening. "Because they're not sure if I'm still one of them. They think I've been corrupted or broken." "You're not," she whispered. He looked away. As night fell, the silence outside deepened. Inside, Elias loaded a rifle in silence, while Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. Abigail remained near Tacoma, unsure where she belonged now, and Jeremiah. He stepped outside, into the night, toward a riderless horse left by the sheriff's men, toward betrayal. The desert night had a way of swallowing sound, of turning even a man's footsteps into whispers. Jeremiah moved quietly, keeping to the shadows between the barn and the edge of the property, where the sheriff's men had left their horses. The moon was high, but the air was heavy, thick with something unsaid. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't need to. Inside, things were unraveling, not with chaos, but with silence. The kind that makes people avoid eye contact, the kind that holds every breath hostage. Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the wooden floor as if it might open up and swallow the truth Elias had finally confessed. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that everything she'd built her life on, trust, a safety, pride in her husband, had cracks wide enough to bury her whole. In the next room, Elias checked the locks on every window again. He wasn't afraid of the warriors, not in the way others were. He was afraid of what the stillness meant and what Tacoma would say next. Abigail stayed by the hearth, watching over the man who had become both a stranger and a mirror to her own confusion. She couldn't stop replaying it, the way Tacoma had looked at her father, the name he'd spoken, the scar on his ribs that matched the stories she'd once overheard at the trading post. Tacoma shifted on the floor, wincing. His wound had reopened slightly. Abigail took a fresh cloth, dipped it into the basin, and gently dabbed the blood away. He didn't flinch. He looked at her, not with the guarded distance he used with others, but with something quieter. "Why'd you help me?" he asked softly. Abigail blinked. "Gail, because you needed help. There's a cost to that." "I know," she said, then paused. "But I think sometimes people are worth the cost." Tacoma's eyes lingered on hers. There was something there, a recognition, not romantic, not yet, but a mutual understanding. Two people from different worlds, both standing at the edge of something bigger than themselves. "You ever seen 200 men hold still that long?" he asked. Abigail shook her head. "No, it's like they're waiting for a signal." "They are," he said. "From me." She lowered her voice. "What will you tell them?" "I don't know," he admitted. I left because I couldn't watch my brother turn our people into weapons. He wanted revenge for everything. I wanted peace. That made me a traitor." "And now?" Tacoma didn't answer. He just looked at the door. Outside, the moonlight traced silver outlines across the riders. They hadn't moved, but every minute they didn't was a minute closer to something breaking. Back inside, Elias entered the kitchen, lowering himself into the chair across from Sarah. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice so low it barely carried, "I should have told you years ago." Sarah nodded once. Not in agreement, but acknowledgement. Her hands still trembled. "I kept it from you because I thought protecting this family meant hiding the truth," he said. "But all it did was build the fire under our feet." "You built this house on guilt," Sarah said, eyes still fixed on the floor. "And now it's burning." "I know." She looked up, eyes tired. "And Jeremiah?" Elias hesitated. "He's not thinking clearly." "He never was," she said. "Not since that winter." Elias frowned. "What winter?" But she didn't answer, because just then a rider appeared. Not from the warriors' camp, but from the east trail, a single silhouette under the moon. Abigail opened the door, stepping out, squinting into the dark. It was Barrow. He rode slow, confident. He dismounted before reaching the porch. "This house got quiet all of a sudden," he said. "Figured someone ought to check if you were still breathing." Elias stepped out behind his daughter. "What do you want?" "I want what's owed," the sheriff replied. "That man in there's got blood on his hands, tribal or not. There's a bounty and my job is to collect." "He's not a criminal," Elias said. Barrow grinned, showing his teeth. "That's for the court to decide. If there was a court in this godforsaken patch of dust." "We'll handle it," Elias said, stepping forward. "No, you won't," Barrow replied. "You brought this heat. You made this bed, but now you're dragging the whole damn town into it." "You think I don't know that?" Elias snapped. "You think I haven't paid every day for what I did?" Barrow's smile faded. "Sundown tomorrow, that's your deadline. I don't get Tacoma by then. I come back with men. Real ones, not neighbors with pitchforks." Elias watched as the sheriff mounted and rode off. Back inside, the air grew still again. Abigail closed the door slowly. Tacoma looked up from the blanket, eyes narrowed. "He's not going to wait." "No," Elias said. "He isn't." And in the distance, hidden beyond the ridge, Jeremiah handed over a worn leather pouch to the sheriff, filled with papers, maps, evidence, and a name, Tacoma. The trap had begun to close, and no one inside the house knew how close the betrayal had already come. The sun rose reluctantly the next morning, stretching pale gold light over the dry hills that watched over the Crowley ranch like old gods. Inside the house, sleep had not visited. The rooms were quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the hush of held breath, the quiet before a breaking. Elias Crowley stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on the line of warriors still camped in silence. Their silhouettes hadn't shifted since the day before, statues on horseback, unmoving, unyielding. But Elias had seen enough death to know that stillness was its own kind of threat. Behind him, the door creaked open. Sarah stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders despite the growing heat. "They didn't move," she said. "No," Elias replied. "Not yet." She looked at him for a long time. Her voice, when it came, wasn't angry, just tired. "You gonna tell me the rest of it now?" Elias nodded finally. "I was part of the Ridge Hollow militia years back. You remember the skirmishes?" "I remember the funerals," she said. "There was an ambush, or we thought it was. A scout brought word of a tribal movement near the North Trail. We were ordered to strike first." Sarah didn't move. "It wasn't warriors," Elias continued. "It was a family gathering, a ceremony. I didn't know until it was over." "And you pulled the trigger," she said flatly. He nodded. "His brother? He was singing," Elias whispered. "I shot a man singing." Sarah closed her eyes, as if that might make the words disappear. "I buried it," he said. "Just kept working the land. I thought if I raised a family right, loved you right, it would cover what I did." She looked at him then, not with hatred, but with a terrible, wounded clarity. "You don't cover a wound like that. Elias, you feed it, and now it's fed enough to come knocking." They stood there in silence, the porch groaning gently beneath their feet. Inside, Abigail tended again to Tacoma, who sat upright now, eyes clearer, though heavy with the weight of returning memory. His voice was low, thoughtful. "My brother was meant to be the next chief," he said. "He followed the old path, strength first, questions later." Abigail wrung out a cloth and dabbed gently at the wound near his ribs. "And you didn't." "I believed there was another way," he replied. "My father saw it too, but he was dying. My brother took the lead. I left before he could make me choose between blood and peace." "So you ran?" Tacoma looked at her. "I didn't run, I stepped aside. That's different." Abigail sat back on her heels. "And now they think you're dead." "I might as well be," he said. "To them, I chose the white man's world. I broke the line." "But you didn't choose this," she said. "I chose not to kill a man I hated," he said, "and that made me the traitor." The sound of hooves broke the quiet. Elias spun from the porch, rifle in hand, but held back when he saw the rider, old, wrapped in a cloak of dust and leather. It was Wekoya, one of the tribal elders. Alone, he dismounted slowly and stood with calm authority at the edge of the property. Elias walked out to meet him. "We want no war," Wekoya said simply. "Then call them off," Elias replied. "I don't command them anymore," the elder said. "They follow Tacoma's brother, and he wants what was taken." "I'm not hiding from that," Elias said. "Then let the boy speak for himself." They brought Wekoya inside. Tacoma looked up at the elder with a complex mix of reverence and resentment. "You should not have come," he said. "You're not dead," Wekoya replied. "That changes things." "I left," Tacoma said. "My place is no longer among the circle." "Your voice still carries weight," the elder said. "Speak it." Tacoma sat silently for a moment, then nodded. "Tonight." "Then it must be in the open," Wekoya said. "With both sides present. Let the land judge the truth." Elias looked between them. "You're talking about a council." "A reckoning," Wekoya corrected. As the elder rode off, the family returned inside. The decision had been made, though no one felt peace about it. That night they built a fire outside the farmhouse. Chairs were set in a rough circle. Abigail lit lanterns and hung them on fence posts, while Sarah prepared bread and coffee in silence. As night fell, the first warriors approached, slow and silent. Then came the townsfolk, hesitant, armed, grim. Sheriff Barrow arrived last, flanked by his men, face tight with suspicion. Jeremiah walked beside him, avoiding Elias's eyes. When Tacoma stepped into the circle, the air changed. His brother emerged from the dark, a towering presence, stern and unreadable. He said nothing. He simply nodded once. Tacoma looked around the circle. "I was born here," he said. "On this land before fences divided it. I watched it change, I watched it burn, and I walked away because I believed we could build something better without fire." He turned to his brother. "But the fire came anyway." He looked at Elias. "And it took everything." Elias stepped forward. "I won't defend what I did, but I won't run from it either. I see now that silence is its own kind of violence." He turned to the crowd, warriors and townsfolk alike. "We have a choice tonight. Keep spilling blood or start planting something better." The silence that followed was long, trembling. Then Jeremiah stepped forward. "You think that's enough? A speech? You put us all in danger." He threw a rolled document into the circle, proof of Tacoma's bounty. But Barrow didn't speak, because Tacoma's brother, the warrior chief, had turned to face him, eyes narrowed. "You gave this to him?" the chief asked Jeremiah. I thought it would serve you," the chief said. Barrow stepped back. "You don't get to speak for this town." But suddenly, no one stood with him. The town's fear had shifted from the warriors to the men who'd lied to protect their own gain. Tacoma's brother looked at Wekoya. "You were right. The truth doesn't always need a blade." But just as he said it, a gunshot cracked the night. and someone screamed. The scream tore through the silence like a blade, slicing open the fragile truce that had just begun to form. People scrambled. Some dropped behind barrels, others dove to the dirt. But Elias Crowley stood frozen, not out of fear, out of recognition. The shot hadn't come from the warriors. It had come from the dark behind the barn, the same place Jeremiah had vanished to moments before the gathering. And now, in the dim light of the lanterns, Elias saw the unmistakable figure of his brother-in-law stumbling forward, a pistol still warm in his hand, and panic written all over his face. Blood stained the ground near the outer edge of the circle. A young tribesman lay on his side, clutching his leg. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't standing either. Tacoma was the first to move. He rushed to the fallen man and crouched beside him, hands moving quickly, gently. The others watched, all of them, and in that moment no one knew what would happen next. The warrior chief, Tacoma's brother, stepped forward slowly. His face was unreadable. No rage, no fear, just stone. "Who fired?" he asked quietly. Everyone looked at Jeremiah. Barrow took a step back, his mouth tightening. "He ain't with me," he muttered. Jeremiah looked wildly from face to face. I thought he was reaching for something." "You fired into a circle of peace," Sarah said, her voice cold and quiet from the porch. "You broke the only thing holding this night together." Elias moved toward him, not fast, not with fury, but like a man who had finally reached the edge of patience. "You sold us out once. Now this," he said. "Is there anything left of the man you used to be?" Jeremiah backed away, shaking his head. "You're all insane. This is your fault, Elias. You brought that savage into our home." The word hung in the air like rot. Tacoma stood now. His hands were red with blood, but not from violence, from trying to stop it. The warrior chief stepped toward Jeremiah. Elias raised a hand. "Don't." "He broke the circle," the chief said. "Yes," Elias replied. "But if we answer that with another broken promise, then we're just building a bigger grave." The chief stared at him for a long time, the kind of stare that tested a man's soul. Then, finally, he turned to Tacoma. "Your word brought us here. What do we do now?" Tacoma looked out across the faces, warriors, townsfolk, family. His eyes landed on Abigail for a moment, and something in his face softened. Then he turned to his brother. "Let me finish what I came here to do." The chief gave one slow nod. Tacoma turned to Barrow. "You've been feeding this war, selling us as enemies, taking land through whispers and papers instead of bullets. Jeremiah helped you. How many more?" Barrow didn't answer, but Wakoya stepped forward, raising something from his coat. A ledger, old, worn, but legible. "The names are in here," the elder said. "Everyone." He handed it to Tacoma. Barrow lunged forward, not for violence, but for desperation. "You can't," but the townspeople stepped between them now. Elias, Sarah, even the storekeeper, old Harlan, who had lost 2 sons to the border raids years ago. "We can," Harlan said, "because we're done being scared of the truth." The council resumed, not with blood, but with names. As the fire burned lower, Tacoma stood in the center of the circle, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "We can't change what's buried," he said, "but we can decide who walks on the land above it." And then, quietly, the warrior chief stepped forward. He removed the necklace from his chest, the carved bone piece Tacoma had once worn, the same one Elias had found clutched in his hand. He placed it in Tacoma's palm, a return, a restoration, not of title, of trust. Elias stepped forward too. His voice was rough but steady. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I'll spend the rest of my days trying to earn something close." Sarah watched him. Abigail beside her didn't speak, but in the flicker of the firelight there was something in her eyes. A beginning. As the warriors slowly turned their horses back to the ridge, the townsfolk quietly dispersed. No one raised a glass. No one cheered. This wasn't a celebration. It was survival. And in the dark, as Elias and Sarah helped the wounded tribesmen inside, Abigail stepped out to where Tacoma stood alone. She didn't say anything at first, then simply, "Are you leaving?" Tacoma looked to the desert. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because something's not finished," he said. And behind them, in the shadows near the edge of the barn, Jeremiah disappeared into the dark, unnoticed, but not forgotten. The morning after the gathering broke not with clarity, but with unease. The silence over the Crowley ranch was no longer that of tension, but of aftermath. The kind of silence that follows a storm not yet understood. The fire pit was cold now, surrounded by empty chairs and scattered dust, like a memory fading before it could be reckoned with. Elias stood alone at the edge of the barn, gazing out across the prairie, where the distant line of riders had vanished hours before. Their departure hadn't felt like peace. It had felt like postponement. Behind him, Sarah swept the kitchen floor. She didn't speak, but her movements were sharp, focused, like her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Abigail sat by the window, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the empty road. Tacoma had gone walking before sunrise, said he needed to think. He hadn't said where. Inside, the wounded tribesman, Arak, still lay in one of the back rooms, bandaged and silent. He hadn't spoken since the gunshot. Sarah had tended to him carefully, methodically, but her face remained unreadable. It was Elias who finally broke the quiet. "I need to ride into town," he said, not looking at anyone in particular. Sarah paused her sweeping. "For what?" "Supplies," he answered, "and to ask some questions." She turned to face him. "To the sheriff's?" Elias met her gaze. "No, not this time." Abigail rose. "I'll go with you." Elias considered it. "All right." They rode out within the hour, father and daughter side by side, dust curling behind their horses like ghosts trying to keep up. They reached the town of Haven Ridge by mid-morning, but something had changed. Doors that were once left swinging open were now shut tight, curtains pulled, faces turned quickly away. The saloon, once a din of voices and cards and bitter drink, was eerily quiet. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath, or choosing not to breathe at all. Inside the general store, Elias approached the counter where old Harlan sat polishing a dusty lamp. "You heard?" Elias asked. Harlan nodded. "Everyone heard." "Then why does it feel like they didn't?" Harlan looked up, his eyes heavy with age and disappointment. "Because most folks don't know what to do without someone telling them who to be scared of." Abigail walked through the narrow aisles, stopping at a rack of scarves. She ran her fingers over one, red with faded embroidery. She remembered her mother wearing one just like it years ago, before the wariness took root in her face. "I need to know something," Elias said, voice lowered. "Jeremiah, has he been here?" Harlan glanced around, then leaned forward. "Last night, after the shot, he rode in with Barrow, didn't say much, just asked for a saddlebag, paid in coin. Left before morning." "Where was Barrow?" "He was gone when I woke." Elias frowned. "Gone where?" Harlan shrugged. "If I were to guess, someplace where apologies ain't expected." Back outside, Elias and Abigail loaded their supplies quietly. As they turned to leave, a woman's voice called from the shadows of the alley between the store and the saloon. "You're wasting your time looking for him." It was Eliza May, the saloon's piano player. She stepped into view, her long coat cinched against the wind. "He's not coming back to town," she said. "Not until he knows the dust has settled in his favor." Elias tilted his head. "You know where he went?" She didn't answer directly. "I know he's not done, and neither is Jeremiah." Abigail stepped closer. "Why would Jeremiah still be helping him after last night?" Eliza looked at her. "Because some men can't accept when their place in the world changes, so they try to burn the map." Back at the ranch, Tacoma returned just before sunset, eyes darker than usual. He looked tired, not from walking, but from thinking. Sarah met him on the porch. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I saw where the horses were missing. 2 sets of fresh tracks heading northwest. They're moving toward the ridge." "Jeremiah?" she asked. "Maybe," Tacoma replied. "Or worse." Inside, Arak stirred for the first time in hours. His voice, when it came, was cracked and distant. "They'll come again." Sarah leaned over him. "Who?" "The ones Barrow paid," he said. "The ones not from here." She froze. "Bounty hunters?" He nodded, barely. "To take Tacoma, or take what's left." As night fell, the family gathered in the living room, for once all of them together. Elias laid the map flat on the table. "They're circling back, I know it." Abigail pointed to the old gully trail. "They used to cut through there during cattle drives. It's hidden until the last half-mile. That's where they'll come from," Elias said. Sarah looked up at him. "What are we going to do?" "We don't run," he said. Tacoma looked around the room. "Then we prepare." And in the darkness, near the outer fence line, a match struck. Someone watched from the edge of the scrub brush, just out of reach of the lantern light. He didn't move, not yet, because waiting was part of the plan. By dawn, the plan was no longer theory. It was reality scraping its way toward the Crowley ranch. Tacoma stood near the water trough, rolling his shoulder with slow, deliberate movements. His wound still burned, but it was healing. He could feel strength returning, enough to fight, but that wasn't the point, not anymore. Fighting was the last card. He was hoping to play a different hand. Inside the house, Elias pored over the same map for the 3rd time, tracing with his finger the gully trail Abigail had marked the night before. It ran behind the barn, hidden from sight, until it curved sharply toward the eastern edge of the property. If a man wanted to come unnoticed, that was the path he'd take. Jeremiah knew that trail. So did Barrow. Sarah walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee, placing one by her husband's hand. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They'd reached a stage of silence that wasn't cold, only necessary, like a quiet before a long sermon or a last supper. Abigail sat by the window, watching the fence line. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she'd know it when it came. It was late morning when the first sign appeared, a dust plume on the southern horizon. Not fast, like a charge. Slow, methodical. A small group of riders, 3 or 4, no banners, no symbols. No, just dust and sun and threat. They're not tribal, Tacoma said, squinting into the glare. No, Elias replied. They're bounty men. Sarah took a slow breath. How many? Hard to say yet, but the answer came sooner than expected. From the other direction, the gully trail. 4 more riders, cutting through the brush at an angle only someone who knew the land would use. They're flanking, Tacoma said, trying to pinch us. We can't hold this place against 2 sides, Elias muttered. Then we don't, Sarah said suddenly. We split them. Abigail turned. What do you mean? Sarah met Elias's eyes. You take Tacoma through the east trail toward the ravine. Abigail and I will stay here. Make them think we're all inside. Buy you time. Elias shook his head. I'm not leaving you 2 here alone. You won't be, she said. You'll be coming back with the truth, with what these men are really after. Tacoma stepped forward. She's right. They don't want your land. They want to silence what I carry. He looked to Elias. And maybe what you know too. Elias's fists clenched. We've been living under a cloud for years. I won't have my family used to cover it again. Abigail stood, her voice calm but certain. Then we give them something to chase. An hour later, the trap was set. Sarah and Abigail prepared the front room, leaving signs of life, boots by the door, lanterns burning in the windows, even plates on the table as if dinner had just been served. Meanwhile, Elias and Tacoma saddled 2 of the fastest horses and rode out through the eastern ridge, hugging the terrain to stay hidden from the southern approach. The dust helped. Too much glare to see clearly. They made it 3 miles before the first shot cracked through the air. It missed, but barely. A second came almost immediately after, striking a rock near Tacoma's mount. They're close, Elias said. 2, maybe 3 behind us. Tacoma pulled his horse hard to the left. We lead them to the ravine, then we cut around. They'll think we're cornered. Back at the ranch, Sarah crouched behind the porch railing with Abigail beside her. The front gate creaked, a sound they both recognized as a trap about to spring. 4 men on horseback rode up slow. Their faces were covered in scarves, eyes hidden behind dust-worn goggles. Their leader dismounted, rifle slung low, boots hitting the dirt with the lazy confidence of a man who'd killed before and wasn't worried about doing it again. He called out, voice cold. Crowley, you hand him over now and we walk away quiet. Inside, silence. Then Sarah's voice, calm, unwavering. He's not here. The man smiled. Then I reckon we'll have a look ourselves. He took a step forward, and the blast from the shotgun stopped him cold. Not a direct hit, just close enough to remind him what they were capable of. Next one's not a warning, Sarah said. The man turned to his companions. Flank the barn, watch for escape. They moved, but slowly now, uncertain. At the ravine, Elias and Tacoma reached the ledge, dismounted, and scrambled down into the rocks. The sun was high, shadows short, no room to hide long, but the canyon bent sharply ahead. If they made it to the turn, they could disappear. Shots rang out again, ricocheting off stone. Elias pulled Tacoma down behind a boulder. We don't have much time. Tacoma looked up, face tense. We don't need time, he said. We need proof. Elias reached into his saddlebag, the old ledger Wikoya had given them inside. Maps, names, documents, everything Barrow and Jeremiah had tried to bury. We get this to the tribal council, Elias said. We end this. But first, Tacoma replied, we survive it. Behind them, bootsteps, fast, close, then a voice, low, steady. You don't get to rewrite history, Crowley. Jeremiah. Standing just above them on the ridge, pistol drawn, and no more room to run. Elias rose slowly, hands raised, the jagged sun behind Jeremiah casting long shadows down the ravine walls. His boots slipped slightly on the gravel, but his voice held firm. You followed us all this way, Elias said. So what now? You pull the trigger and go back to what? Jeremiah didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked between Elias and Tacoma, then down at the leather-bound ledger resting on the ground between them. That book, he said coldly. That's your ticket to martyrdom, huh? Exposing Barrow, clearing your conscience, making yourself the hero of a story you helped write in blood. Tacoma stood now too, slowly, carefully. This isn't about stories, it's about truth. Truth? Jeremiah sneered. You know what truth is in this land? Whatever the man with the gun says it is. Tacoma took a step forward. And that's exactly what destroyed everything we both came from. You think the people out there want to keep living, scared, split, bleeding from shadows? They want this to end. Jeremiah's jaw twitched. You don't get to speak for this place. You left your own people. I left to stop a war before it became endless, Tacoma said. I came back to stop it again. Elias's voice was quieter now, steadier. You were my brother, Jeremiah. Not by blood, something deeper. But I see now that you never forgave me. Jeremiah's hand trembled slightly on the pistol. You buried a lie, Elias. Built a home on it, and let me kneel beside you every Sunday like it never happened. I know, Elias replied. And I should have told you, I should have told everyone. The silence that followed was long, broken only by the soft call of a hawk circling far above. Tacoma reached down slowly, deliberately, and picked up the ledger. He held it up, not in defiance, but in offering. This doesn't fix what happened, he said, but it keeps it from happening again. Jeremiah's face twisted. Conflict warred behind his eyes. Then slowly, he lowered the pistol, but he didn't drop it, and he didn't leave. I'm not your enemy, Tacoma said. Then why does it feel like everything's slipping away the moment you step back into our lives? Jeremiah asked bitterly. Because the world's changing, Elias said, and we either change with it or we rot with what we built before. They stood like that for a long time, until, from the distance, the unmistakable echo of a gunshot rolled across the canyon. Elias and Tacoma turned sharply toward the sound. Jeremiah took 2 steps back, then disappeared behind the ridge without another word. Back at the ranch, the scene had shifted into chaos. 2 bounty men had pushed past the barn and were making their way toward the front porch. Sarah and Abigail were still inside, armed, frightened, but calm. I see one by the corral, Abigail whispered, crouching near the window. Sarah nodded. We let them get close. Too close, they get desperate. Not close enough, they get confident. Abigail swallowed. You're not afraid? I'm afraid of what happens if we let people like that write how this ends, Sarah said. That's all. She motioned to her daughter to take the far corner of the room. Outside, the bounty men moved cautiously. House looks quiet, one muttered. Too quiet. A third man approached from the rear, trying the door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, stepping inside. Abigail moved first, not to shoot, but to make a sound. She kicked over a tin bucket near the kitchen, letting it clatter across the floor. The man froze, turning toward the noise. That was when Sarah stepped out from the side hallway, shotgun raised, steady. Back out, she said. The man raised his hands, smirking. Lady, you ain't gonna... But she didn't flinch. Try me, she said. He backed out, hands still raised. The other 2, hearing the scuffle, moved toward the porch, but a whistle from the fence line stopped them. They turned and saw Tacoma on horseback, riding hard back toward the ranch, Elias just behind him, holding the ledger aloft like a signal flag. From the ridge above, Jeremiah watched them ride and made a decision. One last choice. He turned his horse west, toward Haven Ridge. By nightfall, the Crowley Ranch was surrounded not by warriors or bounty men, but by silence, and the knowledge that something larger was coming. Inside, Elias laid the ledger on the table, flanked by Sarah and Abigail. Tacoma stood across from them, arms crossed, face shadowed by firelight. We take this to the tribal council in the morning, Elias said. Let them see what Barrow was hiding. The land grabs, the paid raids, all of it. Sarah nodded. What if they don't believe it? Then we show them what kind of men are willing to kill to keep it buried, Elias said. Tacoma looked to the door where Arak now stood, leaning weakly on the frame but standing. I'll speak, Arak said, voice rough. They'll listen. And outside, somewhere beyond the hills, Sheriff Barrow was already gathering what men he had left. Because tomorrow the ledger would be opened, and secrets would finally be set loose into the open air. Dawn broke like a held breath finally exhaled, sweeping gold across the scorched plains and jagged hills of the New Mexico frontier. The Crowley Ranch stood quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant one thing. A storm was near, and this time, it would not pass quietly. Inside the house, the Crowley family prepared with the grim efficiency of people who had already lost too much to be naive. Elias stood near the fireplace, strapping a leather satchel over his shoulder. Inside was the ledger, the truth they were risking everything to deliver. Tacoma stood beside him, face unreadable, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper, determination built from pain. Sarah moved between rooms, checking supplies, wrapping food, gathering cloth. She moved like a soldier, not from training but from survival. Abigail stood in the doorway, her hands wrapped in bandages from tending Arak's wound through the night. He sat upright now, leaning heavily against the wall, his breathing stronger, though he still winced with each movement. You don't have to come, Abigail said gently. I do, he replied. They won't believe unless they see us both. Tacoma gave him a firm nod. They would ride at first light through the Western Ridge Trail, across the low ravine and down into Red Mesa, where the Council of Elders had once gathered. Elias knew the route, but not the men who might now lie in wait along it. Barrow wouldn't give up the land, or the lie that gave him power, without blood. And Jeremiah? No one knew where he stood anymore. 2 hours into their ride, the wind picked up, thick with grit, howling softly through crevices in the land. A bad omen. Elias kept his hand close to the satchel, feeling the weight of what it carried. What if they don't care? He asked Tacoma. What if they know, and they let it happen anyway? Tacoma didn't look at him. Then they'll have chosen their fate. They crested a hill and saw the flat basin beyond, Red Mesa in the distance. Low stone formations like sleeping giants under the sky. The sacred meeting grounds lay beyond it, but before they could descend, Tacoma raised a hand. Movement in the valley below. Riders, 6 of them, dressed in dust-colored coats, rifles slung over their shoulders, moving in a line. Barrow's men. I told you he wouldn't let us walk in quiet, Elias muttered. Abigail, riding just behind them, pulled her horse up beside Tacoma's. Can we go around? Not without being seen, Tacoma said. But if we split, draw them off. Elias shook his head. Too risky. No, Arak said, his voice hoarse. Let them chase me. Tacoma looked back. You're not strong enough to ride alone. I don't need to ride far. Just enough to get their eyes off you. Elias hesitated. He's right. It might work. They gave Arak the smaller mare. Fast, nimble. He took off down the left ridge while the others cut low into the ravine. It worked. Within minutes, the 6 riders split, 4 veering off after the decoy. That left 2. Elias, Tacoma, Sarah, and Abigail slid into the rocky lower valley, their horses kicking loose gravel down the slope. They moved fast, but not fast enough. A rifle cracked. The sound echoed off stone like a thunderclap. They ducked low. Another shot, this one closer. Elias turned, drawing his revolver, but he didn't fire. He scanned the ridge. I see them, Abigail shouted. North ridge behind the rock. Tacoma dismounted quickly, pulling Elias behind a ledge of stone. He nodded once, then slipped into the shadows of the ravine. He moved like wind through a canyon, silent, deliberate. The next shot never came. Instead, minutes later, the 2 remaining bounty men came stumbling out from their cover, unarmed, hands raised. One with a bloody nose, the other just pale with fear. Elias raised a brow. What did you say to them? Tacoma answered flatly. Told them the tribe was watching, and they'd be judged not by the men they followed, but by the choice they made now. Sarah grinned, despite herself. That'll stick. They rode the rest of the way in silence. At Red Mesa, the elders gathered slowly, like dust forming around stone. Word had spread, not through shouts, but through whispers. Wakoya stood waiting by the fire ring. You brought it? He asked. Elias nodded and handed him the ledger. One by one, the elders opened the pages. Their faces changed, slowly, quietly, not in shock, but in recognition, as if what they saw wasn't news, only proof. The names match what we feared, Wakoya said. But proof is not always enough. Tacoma stepped forward. My brother's rule was born from pain, he said, but pain turned to fire, and fire turned to ruin. He glanced at Abigail. There are people here, not just white, not just tribal, who are trying to stop the burning. The elders looked among themselves. Then one, an older woman with a braid thick as rope, stepped forward. We will speak to your brother, she said, but he does not answer to council anymore. We don't need his permission, Elias said, only the truth. Back at the ranch, night fell hard. Sarah sat by the window watching the stars blink into view. From the hills beyond the barn, hoofbeats sounded. Not a threat, not yet, but a storm nonetheless. Because Jeremiah was back, and this time, he wasn't alone. Jeremiah Crowley rode under cover of dusk, his silhouette cutting a jagged figure against the horizon as he approached the Crowley ranch with 4 men behind him, hard-eyed, silent, and dressed in worn coats marked by dust and old blood. Not bounty hunters, not townsfolk, mercenaries, paid hands, the kind a man hires when he wants something done quickly and buried deeper than consequence. The Crowley house stood still under the rising moon. Lamps glowed faintly behind the windows. Inside, Sarah was the first to sense it. She rose from her chair, moved to the window, and her breath caught in her throat. They're here. Abigail moved beside her, saw the riders descending the path near the ridge. How many? 5. Jeremiah's leading. Sarah's face hardened. Of course he is. They locked the doors and doused the lamps, moving silently through the house like they had rehearsed it, because in a way they had, not with drills but with years of living close to the edge. Sarah placed her palm gently on the side of Abigail's face. You remember the back trail? Abigail nodded. The river trail past the rocks. If it turns bad, you run, you don't wait for me, you hear me? I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you, and I will if your father comes back and I'm not here. But you keep running. Abigail's eyes brimmed, but she nodded. Outside, Jeremiah dismounted slowly, eyes on the front porch. He looked like a man who'd come home to finish a long-held argument and already decided how it would end. One of the hired men stepped forward. House looks quiet. Jeremiah raised a hand. That's what worries me. He took 3 slow steps up the porch. The wood creaked beneath his boots. He reached the door, raised his hand to knock, then stopped. Something shifted in his face. Not regret, but memory. He reached for the latch. The door didn't open, because it had never been locked from the inside. It had been barred. He stepped back instinctively. That's when Sarah appeared from the shadows near the barn. Shotgun raised, steady. Jeremiah, she said coldly, you're not welcome here. His eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. You always did know how to greet a man. I greet men. You brought cowards. Jeremiah smirked, but it was thin. You know what Elias is walking into, don't you? The council's not going to change anything. They never do. Then why are you so afraid of what they'll hear? His smile faltered. I came to finish what your husband started, clean up his mess. By burning down what's left of our lives, she said. That ledger exposes Barrow, not us. But you couldn't stand the thought of truth taking root. He stepped forward. That land belongs to people like us, Sarah. People who built it. People who bled for it. She didn't lower the shotgun. No, it belongs to people willing to pay for it with honor. You sold yours long ago. The men behind Jeremiah tensed, but none stepped forward. Jeremiah hesitated, and in that pause, long enough to think, short enough to shoot, a sound came from the ridge. Hooves, fast. Elias. Tacoma. Behind them, Wikoya and 2 council elders, robes fluttering behind their horses, their faces like carved stone. The 5 mercenaries drew back, unsure. Jeremiah turned, startled. No, you're too late. Elias dismounted and approached, ledger in hand. You wanted to silence this, he said, but now it's louder than it's ever been. Wikoya stepped beside him. The council has read the names, seen the maps, heard the stories. Your sheriff is finished. Tacoma moved to the center of the yard. We are not here for revenge. We are here for justice, and we will not leave until it is done. One of the mercenaries looked at Jeremiah. You didn't say there'd be council witnesses. Jeremiah didn't answer, because he didn't know what to say. Sarah lowered the shotgun, not as surrender, but as conclusion. You need to leave now, she said. Elias looked at his brother-in-law. You can run, or you can stand and tell them what you did. Either way, your game's over. The silence that followed was crushing. And then from behind the barn, the battered sheriff appeared, limping, dirt-streaked, his badge dull with rust. Barrow had come too, gun drawn. But before he could speak, Tacoma raised his hand. You're not in charge anymore, he said. Barrow's eyes darted. No, you don't get to decide. But the council had already surrounded him. Barrow's hand trembled. He dropped the weapon. Jeremiah turned to leave, slowly, quietly. Abigail stepped forward. You could have chosen differently. He looked at her, something flickering across his face. Maybe, but I chose early. And then he rode. Not chased, not stopped, just gone. The night settled again, wind curling softly through the porch slats. And Tacoma stepped forward, placing the ledger in the fire ring at the center of the yard. We don't need to keep the fire burning anymore, he said, and lit the truth, not to hide it, but to end it. The fire crackled as the ledger burned, a slow, deliberate blaze that sent ashes into the New Mexico night. Faces gathered around it were illuminated in flashes of gold and shadow. Elias, Sarah, Abigail, Tacoma, Wikoya, the elders, and the quiet warriors who had returned not for war, but to witness the final unraveling. No one spoke at first, because the burning of the ledger wasn't erasure, it was release. The words had already done their work. The truth had been seen, judged, and carried forward, not in ink, but in memory. And memory here was sacred. Sarah sat beside the fire, shoulders slack for the first time in weeks, not relaxed, just relieved that the walls weren't closing in anymore. Abigail leaned against the porch post, her eyes fixed on the night sky. Above them, stars blinked into life, clear and piercing. Tacoma stood at the edge of the yard, just beyond the light, looking toward the horizon where the tribal riders had disappeared hours before. His brother had not returned, neither had Jeremiah, and perhaps that was fitting. Will there be consequences for Barrow? Elias asked quietly. Wikoya nodded. He will face tribal judgment. We have agreed with the remaining town council, what's left of it. He will answer for what he tried to hide, and who he paid to keep it buried. Elias sighed. And the land? Boundaries will be redrawn, Wikoya said. Not with fear, with negotiation. Sarah raised a brow. And when that fails? Wikoya smiled, just slightly. It won't, because now there are people on both sides who know what's at stake if it does. Abigail walked over to Tacoma. For a moment they stood together in silence, watching the dark line of the hills. I thought it would feel different, she said. Like, I'd feel clean after all this. You don't feel that? He asked. She shook her head. I feel like I'm standing on something fragile, like everything we saved is still cracked underneath. Tacoma nodded. It is, but we don't fix what's broken by waiting for it to feel new. We fix it by staying and trying. She looked up at him. Are you staying? He hesitated. I was ready to leave, he said. After this, thought there wouldn't be a place for me anymore. But now, he turned to her, expression soft but sure. I think I found one. Behind them, Elias and Sarah watched from the porch. She leaned into him gently. He wrapped an arm around her waist, tentative at first, then certain. You never told me, she said, what you plan to do after this. I didn't know, Elias admitted, but I think I want to rebuild, not the ranch. Us, Sarah nodded slowly. It won't be easy. No, he said, but it'll be honest. Abigail turned back to the house. Will they rebuild the school? She asked. They will, Elias said, and this time there'll be room for everyone. Tacoma smiled, and maybe, he added, someone to teach both languages. They laughed, but gently, like laughter rediscovered. That night, long after the fire had dimmed and the horses had been watered and the house had gone quiet, Elias sat alone on the porch. A letter rested on his lap, not yet sealed. He had written it for Jeremiah, but he wasn't sure if he would send it. He read it again. You tried to save something that never belonged to us alone, but I understand why, and I forgive you because if I don't, I stay the man I was. He folded it slowly. Abigail stepped out behind him. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Too much quiet, he said with a soft smile. Feels like a lie. No, she said. Feels like a beginning. He nodded. And in the hills beyond, the coyotes howled. Not a threat, but a song. As if even they understood the land had changed. But the past was not gone. It had simply made room for what came next. Morning light came slow and golden, stretching across the fields like a final blessing. For the first time in weeks, the Crowley ranch did not wake to the sound of boots scrambling or gunmetal tension hanging in the air. The crisis had passed. The reckoning had come, and now what remained was the long, quiet work of healing. Elias rose early. He walked the fence line alone, inspecting the old posts and splintered wood. Some parts of the land were scarred, just like him, but he touched the soil the way a father touches the shoulder of a wounded son, not to erase the pain, but to let it know it still belongs. Inside the house, Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the porch rail. No words passed between her and Elias for a long moment. They just stood together, side by side, in the kind of silence that only comes when people have said everything that mattered and survived it. Later that morning, the tribal delegation returned, not with weapons, but with tools. Wikoya and the remaining elders brought wood, fabric, and seed. In the center of the yard, where the fire ring had once held a secret, now they began building a marker. Not a grave, a monument. Simple, strong, a circle of stone, and within it, a tree planted in soil that had once held only dust. The ground was taken in blood, Wikoya said to those gathered, townsfolk and tribe alike. But what we grow here now will not be. People from Haven Ridge came too, slowly. Not all of them, but enough. Eliza May brought blankets. Harlan from the general store brought tools. A boy from the chapel brought his sister to see what peace looked like. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The Crowley Ranch was no longer a battleground. It was a beginning. Tacoma stood near the base of the new tree.
When the smoke clears and the bodies fall, only silence remains. If this story touched you, subscribe, because in the West, nothing stays buried for long.